On January 14th, 2023, a record-breaking blizzard hit central Iowa. Power lines were down. Cell service was gone. The Harlan family thought the worst thing that could happen was being trapped without heat, until their 1987 Magnavox television started showing the future. It was the kind of blizzard that makes the whole world disappear. January 14th, 2023. Just outside Urbandale, Iowa. Wind chills dropped to -35. Power lines snapped under the ice. Cell service went completely dead. For most families, it was just another brutal Midwest winter night. But for the Harlan family, out on their old farmhouse 6 miles east of Urbandale, something much stranger was about to begin. Mark Harlan, a 42-year-old truck driver, had barely made it home before the roads closed. His wife, Sarah, a former elementary school teacher, had already pulled out every blanket in the house. Their 14-year-old daughter, Emily, was curled up on the couch with her phone, and 9-year-old Jacob was clutching his favorite stuffed bear, trying not to look scared every time the wind howled against the windows. At 7:42 p.m., the power flickered once, twice, and died completely. The house plunged into darkness, save for the warm, flickering glow of the fireplace they had lit earlier for heat. Mark added another log while Sarah gathered the kids closer to the fire. The wind screamed outside, rattling the old windows. Then they heard it, a loud electrical hum coming from the back sitting room, a lightly used space at the far end of the house that mostly stored old furniture and boxes, the room they rarely went into. Then came the unmistakable sound of heavy analog, TV static. The family froze. "What the hell was that?" Mark said, sitting up straight. Sarah's eyes widened. "It sounded like a TV turning on." Jacob clutched his bear tighter. "I don't like it." Mark grabbed a flashlight. "Stay here, I'll check it out." But Emily was already on her feet. "No, we're coming with you." The family moved together down the dark hallway, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the blackness. As they stepped into the doorway of the back sitting room, they stopped dead. The old 1987 Magnavox CRT television, the heavyset that had come with the house 5 years ago, was on. The screen glowed with heavy, grainy static, casting an eerie blue light across the dusty room. No one had been in there all evening. Mark stared, confused. How is it even on? The power's completely out." Sarah stepped closer, her voice shaky. "Mark, you unplugged it last month, didn't you? When we moved the couch?" "I did," Mark said, shining the flashlight behind the TV. "Look, the cord is still unplugged from the wall. There's no way it should have any power." Emily's voice cracked with excitement, mixed with fear. "Then how did it turn on by itself? TVS don't just do that." Jacob hid partially behind his mom. "Dad, make it stop. This is scary." Before Mark could answer, the static suddenly cleared just enough for a familiar local news anchor to appear. The image was slightly distorted, like looking through warped glass. "Good evening. Our top story tonight. A massive multi-vehicle pileup has shut down I-80 just west of Des Moines. At least 7 people are confirmed dead, with many more injured. Officials say black ice and whiteout conditions are to blame." The family stood there in stunned silence, gathered in the doorway, the warm fireplace light flickering far behind them in the living room. Mark shook his head slowly. This doesn't make any sense. Power's been out for 20 minutes. How are we getting a news broadcast? Sarah leaned forward, whispering, maybe they're running on generators at the station. But still, how is our TV getting it with no power? They listened as the report continued with specific details, the exact location of the crash, the types of vehicles involved, even the names of 2 victims that had already been released. Eventually, the signal faded back into static. Mark stepped forward and yanked the cord out, even though it was already unplugged, just to be sure. The family went to bed that night, feeling deeply uneasy. Until the next morning. At 6:15 a.m., Mark's phone suddenly got 1 week bar of service. A single news alert popped up. 7 dead in I-80 pileup overnight near Des Moines. Every detail matched what they had seen on the old TV the night before. Sarah laughed it off at first. See? It had to be a coincidence. They probably reported it earlier, and we just caught some weird, delayed signal. But Emily wasn't convinced. Mom! The TV wasn't even plugged in. That night, the blizzard grew even worse. The wind screamed louder. Even with the fireplace roaring, the temperature inside the house dropped so low they could see their breath. At 11:47 p.m., they were all huddled near the fire in the living room when they heard it again. The loud electrical hum coming from the back sitting room. The old TV had turned itself on once more. Mark muttered under his breath, "Not again!" The family slowly made their way down the hallway. Heavy analog static roared from the set. Sarah grabbed Mark's arm. "How is this happening?" she whispered. "We both saw it wasn't plugged in last night." As they reached the doorway, the same distorted news anchor appeared. This time, the report was different. Tragedy in Marshalltown tonight. A house fire has claimed the lives of an elderly couple. Firefighters say the blaze started around 1:30 a.m. due to a space heater left running. The family stared in silence, the blue glow of the TV mixing with the warm fireplace light behind them. The next morning, they learned the truth. An elderly couple had indeed died in a house fire in Marshalltown, about 40 miles east. The fire started at 1:27 a.m. Emily started writing everything down in her notebook. By the third night, they were waiting for it. 11:47 p.m. sharp. The TV clicked on again in the back room. This time, the broadcast felt more personal. The anchor, whose skin now looked strangely pale and whose eyes seemed a little too wide, looked directly into the camera and said, "In local news, Sarah Harlan, a former teacher from Urbandale, has been let go from her substitute position after an incident involving a parent complaint." Sarah's face went white. She hadn't told anyone yet, but she had received the termination email on her phone earlier that day when service briefly returned. Mark stood in the doorway, staring at the old television. What the hell is this thing showing us? Emily whispered the question that would haunt the rest of their week. Is it showing us the future? Over the next several nights, the broadcasts kept coming from that back sitting room. Some were small, some were terrifying, and every single one came true. The Harlan family had no idea that what started as curiosity would soon become an obsession. an obsession that would trap them in something far worse than any blizzard, something that refused to let them go. By the fourth night of the blizzard, the Harlan family was no longer curious. They were addicted. Every evening, they dragged extra blankets and chairs into the back sitting room. The fireplace in the living room still crackled, casting long shadows down the hallway, but its warm light barely reached this cold, dusty corner of the house. They sat together in the dark, staring at the old Magnavox like it was alive. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the TV would hum to life. Always unplugged, always impossible. The broadcasts were getting clearer and much more personal. On the fourth night, the distorted anchor looked straight into the camera and said, "Breaking local news. 9-year-old Jacob Harlan from Urbandale suffered a severe head injury tonight after falling down the basement stairs at his family's farmhouse. Paramedics say the boy tripped in the dark while trying to retrieve a flashlight." Sarah immediately pulled Jacob against her. "Jacob, you are not going anywhere near the basement. Do you understand me?" Jacob nodded quickly, eyes wide. "I won't. I promise." The next morning, while the family was eating cold cereal by the fireplace, Jacob remembered his stuffed bear had fallen behind the couch. As he reached down to grab it, the old floorboard he was kneeling on suddenly cracked loudly. He lost his balance and tumbled backward, stopping just inches from the top of the steep basement stairs. Mark lunged forward and caught him by the arm at the last second. The prediction had almost come true. That afternoon, as the wind howled outside, Sarah brought up something she'd heard years ago from an old neighbor. "You know, people around here have always whispered about this house," she said quietly. "The previous owners told us the farmhouse was built on land that used to be part of an old poor farm back in the 1800s. Dozens of people supposedly died here, from sickness, accidents, even a few who lost their minds. They say some of them never really left." Mark scoffed at first. "Come on, Sarah. Every old farmhouse in Iowa has some ghost story." But Emily looked up from her notebook. "Mom's right. I found stuff online before the internet died. There are legends about farms around Urbandale and Marshalltown where doors slam on their own, cold spots appear, and people hear whispering voices at night. One story talks about a woman in a gray dress who wanders the fields looking for her lost child. Another says, if you leave a light on in an empty room, something will turn it off, or turn it on when the power's out." Jacob shivered. "Is that why the TV keeps coming on?" No one had a good answer. Emily's notebook was now filled with pages of frantic handwriting. She had started numbering every broadcast. Broadcast number 7 was the one that truly broke them. The anchor's face looked even more wrong this time. Skin too smooth, eyes slightly too large. His voice had a faint electronic warble underneath. "Tragedy strikes the Harlan family of Urbandale. 14-year-old Emily Harlan was killed instantly when the family's old barn collapsed during high winds. Rescue crews say the structure had been weakened by years of neglect and heavy snow load." Emily's face went pale. "We go in that barn almost every day." Mark stood up angrily. "Enough. We're boarding that barn shut tomorrow. No one goes near it." But the fear was already sinking in. Sarah whispered, They say some of these old farmhouses carry grudges. The spirits don't like when new families try to change things. Then came broadcast number 9. The anchor spoke with calm detachment. In local news tonight, Sarah Harlan, 39, was found dead in her home after suffering a severe asthma attack. Paramedics say the combination of extreme cold, stress, and poor air quality from the fireplace likely contributed to the fatal episode. Her husband, Mark, was screaming for help, but the blizzard prevented emergency services from reaching the farmhouse in time. Sarah's hands started shaking. She had suffered from mild asthma since she was a teenager, but she hadn't had a serious attack in years. That same night, after the broadcast ended, Sarah suddenly began struggling to breathe. Her chest tightened painfully. Mark frantically searched through boxes in the dark for her inhaler, while Emily held the flashlight with trembling hands. They found it just in time. The family was now living in terror of the clock, striking 11:47. On the 8th night, the TV showed something truly horrifying. The screen glitched violently before clearing. For the first time, the broadcast wasn't a normal news report. It was security-style footage of their own living room. The timestamp read, January 22nd, 2023, 2:14 a.m. They watched in frozen horror as the camera showed their future selves. Mark, Sarah, Emily, and Jacob huddled together on the couch, staring at this very same television while their house burned around them. Flames crawled up the walls behind them. Smoke filled the room. The distorted anchor's voice returned, calm and cold. The Harlan family home was completely destroyed by fire early this morning. All 4 family members are presumed dead. The footage lingered on their terrified faces as the fire grew closer and closer. Mark finally snapped. Turn it off! Turn the damn thing off! He grabbed a nearby wooden chair and smashed the screen. Glass shattered. Sparks flew. The TV went dark. For the first time in days, the back sitting room was silent. The family stood there, breathing hard, surrounded by broken glass and the distant glow of the fireplace. Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. Mark, what if we just made it worse? What if the old stories are true and this house doesn't want us to leave? Emily stared at the destroyed TV, tears in her eyes. What if it's already happening? The blizzard continued to rage outside. The temperature inside the house kept dropping, and even though the old Magnavox now lay in pieces on the floor, something was still watching. Because at 11:47 p.m. the following night, a faint blue glow began to flicker from the shattered remains of the television. A new broadcast was coming, and this time it would show them the end. The blizzard showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it had grown even more savage. By the 9th night, the Harlan family was barely surviving. After the television predicted their house would burn down, fear had taken over. They kept the fireplace burning as low as possible, terrified that a strong fire might somehow cause the very disaster they'd seen. Because of that fear, they had been extremely conservative with their firewood. What started as a large pile had dwindled dangerously low after 9 straight days of brutal cold. The last of the dry wood was gone. All that remained were a few damp logs they had dragged in from outside. These burned poorly, producing more smoke than heat. The old farmhouse never well insulated to begin with, had grown bitterly cold. Ice was forming on the inside of the windows. Their breath hung thick and visible in the air. The temperature inside the house had dropped into the low 30s. The family huddled together in the living room under every blanket they owned, shivering uncontrollably. No one had slept properly in days. Mark stared at the weak, struggling flames in the fireplace. "We're almost out of wood," he said quietly. "If the fire dies completely, we won't make it through another night." Sarah pulled Jacob closer, her voice trembling. "We don't have a choice anymore. We have to get out of this house." But leaving was nearly impossible. The snow had drifted over 10 feet high in places. The long driveway was completely buried. Mark's truck sat useless under a mountain of snow. They were completely isolated, 6 miles from the nearest town, with no one around for miles. At exactly 11:47 p.m., a faint blue glow began leaking from the back sitting room. The shattered remains of the old Magnavox were coming back to life. Mark rose slowly, his breath clearly visible in the freezing air. "Stay here." None of them listened. The whole family followed him down the dark hallway. The broken television flickered weakly. Glass shards still littered the floor. Wires hung exposed. Yet, a distorted news broadcast pushed through the static. The anchor's face was barely human. Skin shifting like bad signal, eyes too wide and unblinking. This time, there was no warning. The broadcast went straight to the footage, security-style camera view of their own living room. Timestamp, January 22nd, 2023, 2:14 a.m. They watched in silent horror as their future selves sat exactly where they were sitting now, huddled on the couch, staring at the television in terror while flames consumed the house around them. Fire crawled up the walls. Black smoke poured across the ceiling. Sarah covered her mouth. "Oh, God, that's us." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "We're watching ourselves die." Jacob started crying softly. The distorted anchor spoke in a calm, almost soothing tone. The Harlan family home outside Urbandale was completely destroyed by fire early this morning. All 4 family members are presumed dead. The blizzard made any chance of rescue impossible. The footage lingered. In the burning room on screen, the future version of Mark suddenly stood up, grabbed a chair, and smashed the television. Exactly what he had done nights earlier. The family watching in real time realized with dawning dread. They were seeing a perfect loop of their own actions. Sarah's breathing grew ragged. "Mark, we can't stay here. We have to get out right now." Mark looked at the boarded-up windows and the howling storm outside. "The snow is too deep. We'll freeze to death before we reach the main road." At 2:12 a.m., the weak fire in the fireplace suddenly flared violently. Far too strong, far too fast. Sparks flew onto the old rug. Within seconds, flames began climbing the curtains with unnatural speed. "It's happening!" Emily screamed. Panic took over. Mark tried desperately to smother the flames with blankets, while Sarah dragged Jacob toward the front door. But the old wooden farmhouse, dry from years of neglect, caught like kindling. Smoke filled the rooms faster than they could think. As the fire raged, the broken TV in the back room somehow grew brighter. The anchor's voice echoed through the house, even though the screen was destroyed. Some futures aren't predicted. They're created. In their final moments, The family turned back towards the sitting room. The TV screen, now completely shattered, showed one last clear image. The four of them, standing exactly where they were, watching the burning house, while looking directly at the camera. The future versions of themselves were staring straight into the eyes of their present selves. Sarah whispered in horror. "We're already on the other side." The screen glitched violently. The date on the broadcast flipped backward. January 14th, 2023, 7:42 p.m. The very first night. The very first moment the power went out. The image cut back to the family standing in the living room by the fireplace, hearing the TV hum to life in the back sitting room for the very first time. Emily's young voice echoed faintly. "Dad, how is it on?" Mark's recorded voice replied, "The power's completely out. There's no way it should have any power." The screen dissolved into heavy static. Then, silence. For several long seconds, there is only the sound of howling wind and distant static. Then, very faintly, almost at the edge of hearing, a child's voice whispers, "It's starting again." Some say the old farmhouse outside Urbandale still stands. Some say that on blizzard nights, if you drive past the long, empty stretch of county road, you can still see a faint blue glow coming from the back room of that lonely house. And if you listen very carefully, you might hear a television that has no power, showing the future to a family that never managed to escape.